Hitman targeted Bumpy's brother in Harlem. What happened in 9 hours made witnesses disappear. The glass shattered before the sound arrived, missing Willie by inches. The shooter thought he was a ghost in the alley, but he had just started a 9-hour countdown that would erase him from the face of the earth. Harlem afternoons have a rhythm: the hiss of a steam press, the rattle of a streetcar, the low hum of conversation in the barbershop on 135th. It was a sanctuary, a place where men could close their eyes and let the razor glide against their throat with absolute trust. Willie Johnson, Bumpy's brother, was in the second chair, the towel hot against his face, drifting in that comfortable space between sleep and waking. He was a quiet man, Willie. He didn't carry the crown, but he carried the blood. And in Harlem, the blood was enough to paint a target. The shot didn't sound like a bang. It sounded like a crack of thunder trapped in a bottle. The front window exploded inward. Shards of glass, sharp as diamonds, sprayed across the checkered floor. The bullet, meant for the back of Willie's skull, missed by a fraction of an inch, burying itself in the plaster wall with a dull thud. The mirror in front of him shattered, turning his reflection into 1,000 jagged pieces. For 3 seconds, there was no sound, no screaming, no movement, just the settling of dust and the ringing in the ears. Willie sat up, the hot towel falling into his lap. He looked at the hole in the wall, then at the empty space where the window used to be. Outside, a shadow moved, a gray coat disappearing into the mouth of the alley. A ghost. The barber stood frozen, his razor hovering in midair. He looked at Willie, and his face went pale. He wasn't afraid of the bullet. He was afraid of the echo. He knew, just as everyone in the shop knew, that the shooter hadn't just broken a window. He had broken the peace, and the man who kept the peace was about to turn the city upside down to find the pieces. The Palm Cafe was more than a restaurant. It was the unofficial city hall of Harlem. At the back table, Bumpy Johnson was nursing a coffee, black, no sugar. He was listening to a grievance from a local shopkeeper about a delivery truck dispute. Bumpy's face was open, attentive, the face of a man who cared about the small gears of his machine. Then the door swung open. It wasn't a casual entrance, it was a breach. A young runner, sweat slicking his forehead despite the cool air, stumbled in. He ignored the maitre d', ignored the bar, and walked straight to the back table. He didn't speak until he was leaning close enough to smell the coffee. "They took a shot at Willie," the boy whispered. "Barbershop on 135th. They missed, Bumpy." But it was close. Glass everywhere. The shopkeeper stopped talking. The waiter pouring water 3 tables away froze. The silence that started at Bumpy's table rippled outward like a shockwave, silencing the jazz on the jukebox without anyone pulling the plug. Bumpy didn't stand up. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He didn't even put down his cup. He simply stopped moving. For 10 seconds, he was a statue carved from granite. His eyes, usually warm when dealing with his people, turned into 2 dark tunnels with no light at the end. The shopkeeper slowly gathered his papers and backed away, sensing that the air in the room had become too thin to breathe. "Is he hurt?" Bumpy asked. His voice was level, devoid of tremor. "No, sir, just shook. But the shooter, he's still in the wind. Gray coat. Heading east." Bumpy set the cup down. The ceramic clinked against the saucer, the only sound in the room. He looked at his lieutenant, a man named Junie, standing by the wall. "Close the doors," Bumpy said softly. Junie nodded. He knew what that meant. It didn't mean the doors of the cafe. It meant the doors of Harlem. "I want eyes on every corner from 110th to 155th, Bumpy continued, his voice picking up a rhythm, a cadence of absolute command. "I want the numbers runners to stop running numbers and start watching the sidewalks. I want the shoe-shine boys looking at shoes. I want the grandmothers looking out the windows." If a man in a gray coat tries to buy a pack of cigarettes, I want to know the brand. If he tries to catch a cab, I want to know the license plate. He stood up then, buttoning his jacket. The movement was smooth, but it carried the weight of a judge putting on his robes. Nobody touches him, Bumpy added, his gaze sweeping the room, ensuring every man heard him. He's not to be touched. He's to be herded. He's a rat in a maze, and I am the one who closes the exits. You tell the boys. Nothing leaves this block but the wind. Junie moved to the phone booth. The runner bolted back out into the street. Bumpy walked to the window of the cafe and looked out. The street looked normal to the untrained eye. Cars passing, people walking. But Bumpy could see the change. He could see the way the doormen were suddenly standing a little straighter, scanning the faces of passers-by. He could see the way the newsboys were whispering to the beat cops. The silent alarm had been tripped. The shooter thought he was running away, but he had just started running on a treadmill. The city wasn't just a place anymore. It was a weapon, and Bumpy Johnson had just pulled the trigger. The hitman, a hired gun from Hell's Kitchen named Miller, thought he knew the city. To him, New York was a grid of escape routes, subways, fire escapes, taxi stands. He had done the job, or tried to, and now the playbook said to disappear. He turned his collar up against the wind, shoving his hands deep into the pockets of his gray coat, the pistol heavy and hot against his thigh. He moved fast, heading toward the subway station on 125th. But Harlem had changed in the 10 minutes since the glass broke. The first sign was the silence. It wasn't that the noise stopped. It was that the frequency shifted. The laughter from the stoops died down as he passed. The rhythm of the jump rope games on the sidewalk faltered. Miller kept his head down, eyes on the pavement. But he could feel the weight of the gaze. It wasn't one person. It was the block. He reached the corner, raising a hand to flag down a yellow cab. The car slowed, the tires crunching on the asphalt. The driver, a heavy-set man with a cigar clamped between his teeth, looked through the passenger window. His eyes locked onto the gray coat. He didn't look at Miller's face. He looked at the description. Without a word, the off-duty light flickered on, and the cab surged forward, leaving Miller standing in a cloud of exhaust. Miller cursed under his breath and turned toward the subway entrance. 3 men were standing at the top of the stairs. They weren't police. They weren't wearing uniforms. They were dressed in the work clothes of the neighborhood: overalls, wool caps, heavy boots. They weren't holding weapons, but they were standing shoulder to shoulder, a human wall blocking the descent into the earth. One of them was eating an apple. He took a slow, loud bite, his eyes never leaving Miller. He didn't say, "You can't pass." He didn't have to. The posture said it all. This hole is closed to you. Miller's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He backed away, turning down a side street, looking for an alley, a shadow, anywhere to vanish. But the shadows were full. In the doorway of a bodega, a grandmother sat on a folding chair. She was knitting, the needles clicking like the ticking of a clock. As Miller passed, she stopped. She looked up, her face a mask of stone, and simply pointed a knitting needle down the street. It wasn't a threat. It was a direction. You go that way. He realized then that he wasn't navigating. He was being herded. He tried to duck into a pool hall to use the phone. The moment his hand touched the door, the music inside cut out. 20 faces turned toward the glass. The bartender shook his head slowly. A single, definitive no. Miller pulled his hand back as if the wood were burning. The panic started to rise in his throat, bitter and sharp. He had faced men with guns before. He had faced cops, but he had never faced a neighborhood that breathed as one organism. Bumpy Johnson hadn't sent a hit squad. He hadn't sent a carload of soldiers with Tommy guns to tear up the street. He had simply whispered to the bricks and the mortar, and the city itself had turned against the intruder. Every exit was blocked by presence. Every alley was filled with watchful eyes. Miller turned west, then north, his options dwindling with every step. The streets were funneling him, pushing him away from the crowds, away from safety, and toward the one place where the eyes stopped and the darkness began. He wasn't running anymore. He was walking the plank. The basement apartment on 141st Street wasn't a hiding place. It was a tomb. Miller had scrambled down the crumbling concrete stairs, kicking open the rotted wooden door, thinking he had finally found a hole in the net. The room was dark, smelling of wet wool and coal dust. The only light came from a street lamp filtering through a grime-encrusted window at sidewalk level, bars across the glass, casting long, cage-like shadows on the floor. He backed into the farthest corner, his chest heaving, the air rasping in his throat like sandpaper. He checked the magazine of his pistol. Full. He had bullets. He had leverage. He told himself he could hold out. He told himself he could negotiate. Then, the door at the top of the stairs opened. It didn't burst open. It swung inward with a heavy, deliberate creak. A silhouette filled the frame, blocking out the dim light from the hallway. Miller raised his gun, his hands slick with sweat. "Stay back," Miller screamed. The sound bounced off the damp walls, sounding thin and pathetic. The silhouette descended. 1 step, 2 steps. The leather shoes made no sound on the wood. As the figure moved into the sliver of light from the street, the face of Bumpy Johnson emerged from the darkness. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a pair of leather gloves in his left hand, slapping them gently against his palm. Thwack, thwack, thwack. "You're a noisy man," Bumpy said. His voice was low, resonant, filling the small room without effort. "You break glass. You run loud. You scream in the dark." "I'll drop you," Miller threatened, aiming the barrel at Bumpy's chest. "I swear to God, I'll drop you right here." Bumpy stopped 6 feet away. He looked at the gun with the mild disinterest of a man looking at a barking dog. "If you pull that trigger," Bumpy said softly, "you won't leave this basement. The men outside won't let your body leave. They won't even let your name leave. You'll just be a stain on the floorboards." Miller hesitated. He could feel the truth of it. He had seen the eyes on the street. He knew there was an army waiting on the sidewalk. The gun was useless because his escape was impossible. "Who sent you?" Bumpy asked. It wasn't a shout. It was a query, simple and administrative. "I ain't talking," Miller spat, though his voice wavered. Bumpy sighed. He unfolded the gloves and began to pull them on, slowly, 1 finger at a time. The sound of the leather stretching was the loudest thing in the room. "You think this is about business," Bumpy said, smoothing the leather over his knuckles. "You think you can come into my house, throw a brick through my life, and then trade information for breath. But you made a mistake. You didn't just try to kill a man. You tried to kill my brother." Bumpy took a step forward. Miller backed up until his spine hit the cold brick wall. "Willie is a gentle soul," Bumpy continued, closing the distance. "He likes his coffee hot and his shave close. He doesn't hurt people. But you put fear in him. You made him shake, and I can't abide that. Stay back." Miller's finger tightened on the trigger, but he couldn't pull it. The dominance in the room was absolute. Bumpy wasn't just a target. He was the inevitable consequence of Miller's actions. The hitman's arrogance had been stripped away, layer by layer, block by block, until only the terrified child remained. "You missed the shot," Bumpy whispered, now standing within arm's reach, looming over the smaller man. "But I don't miss." Miller's resolve broke. He lowered the gun, his shoulders slumping. Realizing that the bullet wouldn't save him from the judgment standing in front of him, he started to speak, to beg, to offer a name, but Bumpy reached out. His gloved hand didn't go for the weapon. It went for Miller's throat. The conversation was over. The trap had snapped shut. The 9-hour chase ended not with a bang, but with the suffocating weight of a debt being collected in full. Detective Vance pulled his unmarked sedan up to the curb on 135th Street. The radio had crackled with the report hours ago. Shots fired, a shattered window, a man running with a gun. But in Harlem, response times were slow, and the shift change had delayed the paperwork. It was nearly midnight by the time the law arrived to look for the crime. Vance stepped out, adjusting his fedora against the chill. He expected to see yellow tape. He expected to see uniformed officers holding back a crowd. He expected to see the jagged teeth of broken glass in the window frame. He saw none of it. The barber shop was glowing with a warm, inviting light. The window, the one that had reportedly exploded inward 9 hours earlier, was whole. It was pristine, reflecting the street lamps without a single crack. Vance walked to the door and pushed it open. The bell above the frame chimed cheerfully. Ding. The barber was sweeping the floor. There were 3 men in the chairs, 1 reading a newspaper, 2 playing a quiet game of chess. They looked up as the detective entered, their expressions mild, unbothered. "Help you, officer?" the barber asked, leaning on his broom. Vance looked at the floor. It was spotless. No glass shards, no scuff marks, no blood. He walked to the window and ran a finger along the frame. The putty was soft. Wet, it smelled of linseed oil. "We got a call," Vance said, wiping the oil on his handkerchief. "Shooting. Man in a gray coat took a pop at Willie Johnson. Right through this glass." The barber frowned, a look of genuine confusion washing over his face. He looked at the chess players. "Shooting? You hear any shooting, Ray?" Ray moved a pawn. "Quiet night, officer. Only thing popping around here is the popcorn at the Apollo." Vance walked to the center of the room. He felt the weight of the lie. It wasn't a panicked lie. It was a rehearsed, synchronized reality. "A man in a gray coat," Vance repeated, his voice hardening. He would have come this way. Maybe looking for a place to hide. Maybe looking to get out of the neighborhood. "Haven't seen a gray coat all day," the second chess player said, not looking up from the board. "Mostly blue. Some brown. No gray." Vance looked at the back wall. The plaster was smooth, fresh paint. It was slightly lighter than the rest of the wall, still drying, but in the dim light it passed. The detective realized then that he wasn't investigating a crime scene. He was standing in a stage set. In 9 hours, Bumpy Johnson's machine had not only caught the shooter, they had erased the event. They had replaced the glass, patched the wall, swept the floor, and scrubbed the memory of every man, woman, and child on the block. "Where is he?" Vance asked, looking directly at the barber. He didn't mean Willie. The barber smiled, a polite, vacant smile. "Where is who? Detective?" Vance stared at them for a long moment. He knew the hitman was gone. He knew he would never be found. Not in the river, not in a ditch, not anywhere the badge could reach. The man in the gray coat had simply ceased to exist, swallowed whole by the concrete. "Don't touch the window," Vance muttered, turning to the door. "Putty's still wet." He walked out into the night. He didn't bother writing a report. There was nothing to report. In Bumpy Johnson's Harlem, if the king said it didn't happen, it didn't happen. The police were just tourists here. Bumpy was the gravity holding it all together. The dawn was still an hour away when Bumpy walked into the small brownstone apartment on St. Nicholas Avenue. It was quiet here. The world outside was still holding its breath, waiting for the sun to confirm that the night was over. Willie was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty glass of milk in front of him. His hands had stopped shaking hours ago, but his eyes were still distant, replaying the sound of the glass shattering over and over again. Bumpy took off his coat and draped it over the back of a chair. He didn't look like a man who had just orchestrated a manhunt. He didn't look like a man who had just acted as judge, jury, and executioner in a damp basement. He looked like a tired older brother coming home from a long shift at the factory. He walked to the fridge, poured himself a glass of milk, and sat down opposite Willie. "You okay, Will?" Bumpy asked softly. Willie looked up. He searched Bumpy's face for a sign of the violence, for a splatter of blood or a flash of anger. He found nothing but calm. "I'm all right, Ellsworth. Just rattled." "That glass." He trailed off, then looked deeper into his brother's eyes. "What happened to the man in the gray coat?" Bumpy took a slow sip of his milk. He set the glass down with a gentle click. "There was no man in a gray coat," Bumpy said. "The police came. They looked. They didn't find anyone. The window is fixed. The floor is clean." "But, Willie," Bumpy interrupted, his voice dropping to that familiar, soothing register that sounded like a prayer. "The wind blew through the city tonight. It knocked over some trash cans. It rattled some windows. But now the wind is gone, and it ain't coming back." Willie understood. In Harlem, when Bumpy said it was over, it wasn't just over. It was history. The hitman hadn't just died. He had been unwritten. Bumpy reached across the table and placed his hand over Willie's. His grip was warm, solid, anchoring his brother back to the earth. "You go to work tomorrow. You get your shave. You walk with your head up. Because nobody touches my blood. Not today. Not ever." As the sun finally broke over the horizon, lighting up the streets of Harlem, the city woke up with a new understanding. The message had been delivered without a headline or a town crier. Everyone knew the rules had been rewritten in invisible ink. You can fight for money, you can fight for power, but if you come for the family of Bumpy Johnson, the earth will simply open up and swallow you whole. And on 135th Street, the barbershop opened for business, the new glass shining perfectly in the morning light, protecting the peace inside.